director for Atheists for Washington State. So before you have a whole bunch of handout material for it. If you haven't heard of American Atheists before, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, kind of a government watchdog, kind of encompass it. And what we do is make sure that the absolute separation between church and state is held in the highest regard. So currently in your state of Washington, there are several bills, and Senate bills and House bills, that are of concern, and there are mitigating bills for that. Currently, as you know, there is a measles epidemic here in Washington State. I see a lot of you shaking your head. So, as it stands right now, Washington State has...
What autisms? I had to say it. Come on now, I had to say it.
So currently right now, Washington State actually has a bill that protects faith-based exemptions for vaccinations, and that is the loophole that a lot of these people are using. But they're also using faith-based exemptions for things like blood transfusions and organ donation and life-saving interventions. And one of the issues is affecting children and vulnerable adults who have no ability to consent. And that is where we are trying to fix that. Now, I don't have this memorized, but currently on the docket right now, there is, hold up here, it is, oops, wrong email. There it is. Okay, so we have HB 176 is concerning the faith-based exemptions regarding criminal mistreatment of children and vulnerable adults. Now, yes, and so that's right now, that's one of the things that they're trying to push. I spoke with Representative Steve Kirby. I spoke with a few other, District 27, I'm trying to remember her name. Spoke with Governor Inslee's office, and also spoke with Senator Patty Murray's office about all of these things, trying to get them to push. Now we got several state senators and state representatives to sign on it. Currently, unfortunately, and I don't know why, it seems to be a hot button issue on both, for some reason, both sides of the aisle are almost refusing to kind of endorse this. And I'm trying to wrap my head around this because I bring up, like, we have a measles epidemic, something that we had deemed eradicated in the United States in 2006. There's no reason for this to be here, but yet here it is. And where we see the outbreaks of these are in some of the most religious areas, and they have in some places up to 80% non-vaccination rates. And what they are using as caveats to get their kids into public school is these religious exemptions. And it's amazing how prolific it is. So if you would look these up, contact your representatives and tell them, hey, as your constituent, I would like you to please endorse these. Contact Governor Inslee's office because he's all up in arms about this. He's actually keeping a tally currently right now. I spoke with their office on Wednesday, and they were keeping a tally on this. So voice your concern. Let them know that this bill does exist. There's a state bill and a House bill. I spoke with also Congressman Danny Heck about this also on Wednesday, asking if we could somehow get some sort of federal mandate introduced. So I will, if you guys want to email me, if you guys got a pen, I do have an actual official email at atheist.org, or you can just look me up. I'm Assistant State Director. So just DF, oops, sorry. So, yep. So DFBENNETT at atheists.org. So that's one of the things that we're trying to currently plug away at right now. Now there are other things that we have been kind of focusing on here and there. Currently it's in Ferndale, I think it was. There was a teacher who was utilizing social studies as a way to proselytize. If you hear about those kinds of incidences, let me know. And I will jump right in on that, and I will handle it for you guys. That's what I'm doing. That's what I That's what I do. So, you know who I am now. I'm glad you guys showed up. And I don't want to take Mr. AtHope's time up anymore. So, may I present to you Mr. Damien AtHope.
Hi, I'm Damien AtHope, and I'm an axiological atheist, which is a value theory or value science atheist. I personally am a value theorist, since I'm not good at doing math. You have to do math to do the scientific axiology. Anyways, I'm going to give you my understanding of religion evolution. And it includes the stages of animism, totemism, shamanism, paganism, and progressed organized religions. So, pre-animism, before religion, to me starts about 300,000 years ago. I'm just going to go real quick through all of them, then I'm going to explain more. Animism is about 100,000 years ago in Africa. And totemism is about 50,000 years ago in Europe, and basically Spain and France. And then shamanism is from Siberia, and it's about 30,000 years ago. And paganism is about 12,000 years ago from Turkey. And progressed organized religion I see is starting in Egypt, since they formalize their religion. Some people think it's Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia to me copied what Egypt did. Mesopotamia is different. They started the city-states, but not the country. The country idea of all under one thing is an Egyptian idea. And to me, when that happens, see, Mesopotamia had multiple deities from multiple cities. But Egypt said, no, our whole country, in a sense, north and south, will be under one system. And that, to me, is when you get organized religion. Anyways, I'll explain everything more. So, and then current world religions, where we kind of think of today, are under 4,000. And we can trace atheist doubt to at least by 2,600 years ago. And so it all starts in a general way with animism, or a theoretical belief in supernatural powers and spirits, or as I say, a spirit-filled life or afterlife. And when we say, what I say, a spirit-filled life, what I mean is that all of life is full of spirits. In other words, that they have things like plant people or plant spirits, and they have rock people or rock spirits. So the difference, like, you can think of it, if an animist makes something, it's more like it already was there, they just help bring it out to them. A little different than totemism that sees themselves as more controlling of nature, where animism is more like a hippie-ish, they live in nature, or they're one with nature. In fact, I've seen an animist in a show go out and hunt for food using a lion, but not killing them, having no weapon, and yet coming back with food. Amazing. They basically wait till the lion has caught something, they wait till it's eaten a certain portion, and they slowly walk up. The lion leaves. They take only a portion. That way the lion knows next time it can leave without having to do any violence, because they're not going to take all of its kill. So they actually learn to work with nature. That's why I think it's ridiculous. People say that religion, which is animism in the beginning to me, started because of fear of lightning. Animists don't fear nature. They don't even fear lions. Come on. Because their mindset is they are one with nature. So they try to figure out how can we best work one with nature. Actually, it's commendable besides all the fantasy nonsense. So then this kind of an animistic idea was more physically expressed in totemism, more of a theoretical belief in the mythical or magical power relationship with spirits through totems. Totems can be used in several different ways. I'm just trying to give you an overview. Okay, and then when this thing becomes fully enlisted and a full-time specific person needs to then do this, that's kind of when you get shamanism, which is in a sense a theoretical belief in the access or influence of spirits through rituals. And then you have a further employment of myths, and then deities added or gods added to all the above. So it's like Legos, boom, 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 boom. They just keep building on each other. There's a little variation in between, but in the general thing, it's just building on top of ideas. So then you have paganism, in a sense, which is a lot more still nature-based than a lot of the current world religions, generally, as I think of them. But it's also hinting close to their link, though, with these ancient later religions, which I think they all stem from. And so my hypothesis expressed an explanation of its building a theoretical house. One is the foundation, animism, and you're basically building the pieces up as you go. So think of it this way. All religious people are an animist. They're an animist plus, 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 plus. So if you believe in a spiritual life or afterlife, or you believe in souls, or anything, that's an animist piece to the rest of the stuff you believe. Oops. So it seems that ancient people had to survive amazing threats in a dangerous universe. They used or tried to use superstition and perceived things as good and evil, harmful or beneficial. And the human immorality is imperfection later as the soul, which thought to affect the living, leading to what I call an ancestor worship, which I think is one of the oldest forms of religious worship. This ancestor worship presumably led to the belief in supernatural beings. And I think that happened probably, in a sense, in totemism, because totemism starts classifying things. So first you have spirits, and then you have a spirit that's for our clan. So it's like the grandmother spirit, grandfather spirit is an ancestor. And then as the clan, in a sense, gets bigger, you need a more metaphorical clan ancestor, because you can't say my family. Although if you look at how, say, the places in England or Scotland or Ireland, they have like surnames that, in a sense, are larger than a family would have actually allowed. People are taking the name for a family they actually don't have a genetic connection to. But I think that goes back to the same thing as the ancestor worship. You had to have a larger, kind of a metaphorical ancestor for our whole clan that we all agreed to, in a sense. So that's when you're going a lot closer to God. You're moving out of the spirit realm because you're starting to make it no longer human, sort of metaphorical, more now it's God, in a sense, or deities. So it's a progression to me. So pre-Animism, the belief that objects contain, in a sense, probably a spiritual energy to them, in a sense, is a magical anthropomorphous thinking that possibly relates to the form of ancestor worship or ancestor veneration, or just veneration of the dead. And so that's one of the things. And I think this is a primal stage that leads to animism. Animism is a belief in perceived spirit world, and like I said, it's possibly about 100,000 years old. And so totemism, the belief in the perceived spirit worlds, can be maintained or created in the physical expression. Shamanism, the belief that a special person can communicate with these spirits on behalf of others through rituals. So, let's think about, when did the Bible say that all this stuff supposedly happened? Well, just to give you a frame of reference, basically the rabbinic tradition would be that it's about 5,770 something years ago. Yeah, not even close. Certainly closer to the nonsense, the belief that Christians often have of 6,000 years. That's probably where they get that from. Just showing you that that's the nonsense. So this is my art of pre-Animism, and all those art of the stones are actual stones. They're not actual size. They're all about the size of like a large silver dollar or something. Some of those are kind of small. But the point is, some of them look bigger. But they even have the one he's sitting on. That's an actual face, so an actual stone is just not that big. I just took creative license just to make it fun, but in a sense, they're all making these faces. So, but I think it kind of starts when we start thinking more. And we start thinking more when we start eating meat. And there's evidence of 3.4 million years ago bones with cut marks made by stone tools in Ethiopia. And then 3.3 million years ago, in a sense, is one of the oldest technologies of stone tools. And then I have the evolution right here of the early stone tools. And so it starts at 3.3 million years ago, then the next jump is at 2.6 million years ago. And then the next jump is at 1.76 million years ago to 130,000 years ago. They kept this tool technology for a long time because it worked. So the first one is just kind of like a chipped stone. The second one is a little bit more modified, but still a bulky chipped stone. But that one is something totally different. To me, that's when also you start to get more symbolism start to happen, because they're making it thinner, they're making it in a certain specific shape over and over and over again for a long time. But let me show you even more. So they start out really big, some of them, and then they actually get smaller. So I think that's very interesting. And so there's the middle, like it says, Stone Age from 300,000 to 50,000. You can see it is a lot different than the early Stone Age. And then the later Stone Age of 50,000 to up to 10,000 is extremely different. So these alluvial stone tools, I think, as you can see, even themselves, the more primitive, the older ones, and then they start becoming a lot more expertise, but they keep a general shape. And I think this is important because to me this shows that when they pass the ideas, they're not just saying, hey, let's make a sharp rock. There's a lot more involved, and experimental archaeology has already showed that to make this type of stone tool, it takes a lot more than just watching someone do it one time. So Homo erectus, upright man, I have there depicted in my drawing with the actual size of the stone tool to a person holding it, just to show you that how big they actually were. But and I think that possibly the Homo erectus wasn't actually hunting. I think they might have been scavenging. Not too different though from the animist people that you can even see today, stealing food from the lions. I don't think that probably was that different. And so I think that they might have used these things actually just to get things that were already dead. But I don't know. But the important thing after that, though, really to me, is 1.5 million years ago to 300,000 years ago, you have the use of fire. And I think with the use of fire and the control of fire, you're going to have some sacralization of fire itself. And I think this is important for the later ideas, because while we look at fire and only look at this, we're not looking at that. And I think up there is actually more important to them than down here. Up here you see these like little stars in the sky. And I think that this represents to them why people think that souls in a sense go up into the stars. And so to me, and in fact later for sure, stars become ancestors. And this is the problem too, is that Totemists don't see a difference between a human ancestor and a clan ancestor that's an animal. So if they say, well, that bull is me, or our clan, or our sign, they mean it is that they're actual genetic, they think, connection. Even though we know that, obviously we don't come from animals. Well, we kind of do, but they're not bulls. So then there's a difference that 1 million years ago, okay, the control use of fire includes cooking. So we're actually having a big jump. Even today, if we eat raw foods, they did a study, and they found in Germany that people that eat raw foods, I can't remember how much, I think it was up to 50% loss in birth rate. It actually really affects our body. And I would say that when we started eating cooked food, it probably really affected our body. Probably in a positive way, since it seems to have a negative connotation when we start to go back to eating non-cooked food. So these to me are what I talked about earlier, this to people before I started. This has to do with, I think, basically like ancestor stones. And I think that it's probably iffy if it's anything supernatural. It's probably more like a headstone or like a grave marker. It means something, but I don't think it's a direct relation to the person. I'm not totally sure, but if you notice, they have like a couple of these have like the second to the last right there, or the fourth one, has two eyes open. The other ones, it's kind of one eye open, one eye closed type of theme. And I think that might be death and life. And so the first one here is about 300,000 years old from the Netherlands. Then the next one is from Africa, and it's anywhere from 800,000 to 300,000. Sometimes the reason that it's hard to tell the date is because they could be like in between the soil, and you know what the one soil is and the other one is, but if an item is somehow in between that, it makes it iffy. And they try to be accurate. So then the other one is from France, and it's 150 to 50. And the other one's 150 to 50, and both also from France. And then one from Germany is 200,000. So Homo erectus probably invented what we can think of as modern living. At least 750,000 years ago, in North Israel, evidence of social organization, communication, divided living, and working spaces, as well as must have built probably Homo erectus, shelters. And this is not a limited thing to them. Also in Tokyo, there's a 500,000-year-old living shelter, and then a 400,000-year-old shelter in France, and then a 350,000-year-old shelter in Germany. So this is what goddess worshippers like to call the oldest goddess, or the alluvian goddess. Yeah, I don't buy it as a goddess at all. I would say this just connects to the ancestor stones, although, I will admit, that middle little dot is interesting, because it actually is a piece of stone wedged in there. So, did they make the hole and wedged in there? Did it form that way and they just modified the stone to highlight it? I don't know. It is interesting, and I would say that certainly it's starting to be more symbolic than just the faces. They're making a body, there's more going on. I still don't think that it's right to call this anything to me. I mean, close to a god or anything. I just think it has to do with these anthropomorphic, stone things that represent, probably ancestors. So these are basically 450 to 300,000 years ago, and you can see that it's not just stones. These are actually not even made of stuff that's that good to use as a tool. So this was directly just made to look like a thing for the whole reason of just making it look like a face. So progressed superstition, 430,000 years ago, in the Pit of Bones in Spain, as seeing evidence of intentional storage of 28 individuals in a cave chamber pit, possibly a symbolic pseudo-womb. And a reddish quartzite tool that was unused was found on top of the bodies. Seems like a possible kind of a funeral rite, or possibly like an early cemetery. Or maybe a whole bunch of different people fell into a hole, far in a cave, and then somehow dropped an unused tool. All these people with only one tool. I don't know about that. So, because I hear sometimes people like, oh no, that can't be symbolic. Okay, make it make sense, because your option doesn't really, like there's another one too that I'll talk about. So this again shows you more of a reference, and the ones at the end, the 423 to 524, those are also little face stones. There's more than that too. In fact, there's more figure stuff than this. I just try to simplify it. So when did we come about, right? So Moroccan hominids, 350,000 years ago, the possible, suggests the Homo sapien lineage, possibly starts or, around this time. And I think it's really interesting because if we can think of ourselves far back, then thinking about these, what we think is special and different, we can see some of these, like I said, 300,000 or 400,000 artifacts is possibly not that outrageous, since our lineage goes back further than we realize. Oops. So this right here gives us an idea. 300,000 years ago, those North African skulls look a lot like us. And in a sense, they're shockingly similar, though, to almost to modern, human skulls. And they hold a combination of advanced and arcane features, suggesting these skulls may represent the very root of modern human species. Another interesting thing is that we always think that our brains are so much bigger. Well, I made a little chart with the brain sizes, so we don't get that confusion anymore. they're not that different. And then even 100,000, when I think animism start, you can see it's a little bit more. So I can see where they went to jump from just kind of being superstitious probably to a more religious mind. I think the more the advanced our mind becomes, the more creative we get to how we think about the world. And then at 10,000 years ago, the reason that the blue's in there, that's where we even got more, the brain didn't grow more, but the actual, stuff inside became more, evolved. What's interesting, that thing in the corner is a 300,000-year-old wolf-tooth pendant. So this symbolic nature of using items is also very old. This gives us a little idea of our interactions with other hominoid species. It's not a straight shot, one-time deal. We had a lot of interactions because guess what? Newsflash, sex is fun. And they didn't care who. So this is the one that some people started saying that it's not symbolic. So this is really deep in the cave, and these bodies are spread out. So they haven't yet found any sign of torches or fire. So it's a dark cave way at the bottom, and yet there's people down there. So they go, ha ha, it's not religion. I go, ha ha, where's the animal marks? They go, oh, well, maybe all these different people walked in there and died. Okay, let's assume that. How is that still not religion? What if they chose to die down there? It's multiple people. So multiple people are all going down, maybe it's an accident, maybe not. But it's very interesting how hard it is. You see the cave. They had to climb up and down and up, and to do what? Just to go in there, and your friend goes in, doesn't come back, and then you go in, and another friend goes in, another friend. And this other thing too is there's actually two branches of the cave. Both branches have bodies at the farthest thing. Accident? I think it's more of a jump to say it had to be not something than to think it is. Especially the fact that there's two separate, cave things, and they both have the bodies. But always stay open. So, getting a little more definite though, these three little pieces on top actually likely were for a whole necklace, and it's 200,000 years ago in northern Africa. And most likely, it was probably by a Neanderthal. So here, I've listed all the oldest evidence of modern humans, just to give you an idea that when we think of we come from Africa, it's not like we come from one specific only place. A lot of times I hear that they say, oh, well, we're basically in East Africa. Well, you mean the lineage we have today stems from that. You don't mean our arcane, because it was more of a dispersal. So Neanderthals diverged from archaic humans about 500,000 years ago from the common ancestor, and several likely occurrences of inbreedings after that. Evidence of Neanderthal DNA is found in German caves expressing early inbreeding, dating back about 200,000 years ago, or more. More than 200,000 years ago, this prehistoric jaw was found in a cave in Israel. And then there's DNA evidence of inbreeding about 100,000 years ago from the Altai Mountains of Russia on the Mongolian border. An early modern human population left Africa much earlier and met with Neanderthals, possibly these moving from Europe towards the east sometime around 100,000 years ago. Anatomically, modern humans also migrated massively from Africa into the Middle East and later Europe, starting about 65,000 years ago. Now, speaking of what Neanderthals believed or may have believed, this I find to be extremely interesting. The fact that there's these 175,000-year-old rings, or I think it could be a possible chapel or sacred space of some kind, certainly is not just random. And the fact that they did this makes me think that they possibly, like my drawing, might have used it in a symbolic way. I don't know, but it certainly seems very interesting. So, the Neanderthal kind of totemism, animism, is from their technology. These claws right here are from a eagle, and they have holes in them, and they found at least one, I think it's 3, but at least one that has sinew, like wrapped around it, like it was used to tie onto something, or a necklace, or maybe it hang off of a pole. I don't know, but certainly they were using it in a symbolic way. And it's found in multiple sites, same behavior. Now, I think that this behavior relates to later, maybe even happened then, I don't know, but later behavior of what's called sky burials. It's basically when you let birds eat the flesh of your dead and then supposedly take them up to heaven. Which heaven actually, for them, is the stars. So the birds take it up to the sky. I don't know that they were doing that for sure then, at 160, but for sure that leads to later the same kind of a behavior. So the first intentional barrier is not human. Neanderthals beat us to the punch. So 130,000 years ago is the earliest undisputed. Now the disputed possibly goes to 250,000 for Neanderthals, but it's iffy if it's the body was dropped and then somehow got buried, or if they intentionally buried it. But anyways, 130 is, and I show all these sites to give you an idea of where the Neanderthals were, these little red dots. They like to move around. There actually was a couple different branches of Neanderthals. So it wasn't like it was all one clan, it's like a couple different clans. There's at least 2, like east and west. But if you see that way over there in Siberia all by itself, in the Soviet cave, they're living up. And they came from here and went all over there. Not all of them, but there's definitely DNA got moved that way. North Israel is 120,000 years ago, and there was a Neanderthal burial of a female, and the material remains in the upper strata of the cave is the mountain steering technology, and small flint tools made of flakes. And very interesting because later, humans copied that same technology. So my question is, did Neanderthals teach us primal religion? Or at least the concepts of burial, possibly even thoughts of afterlife? And I think that this could be evident also at that cave with other burials. So this is my idea that probably the first atheist happened when the first person told them, hey, this is something amazing, and they just said, I don't believe you. And so that's why my thing is, basically, it's an African and a Neanderthal, the dead Neanderthal, and the Neanderthal is trying to teach the African religion. So he says, look, it's the Lord of Light, the Great Spirit, as some say, is my eternal guiding fire in the sky. And the African looks at him and says, yeah, I don't believe you. So animism starts approximately 100,000 years ago in Africa. And up in the sky we have an afterlife, but we don't have any deities. It's just an afterlife. And as you see, afterlife is not limited to humans. Everything it's alive in a sense. And of course, there could even be rocks up there because rocks are alive. You didn't know that? They're all animated. Everything has a spirit. The carpet has a spirit. So, primal religion, animism, about 100,000-year-old belief system. So it actually starts, or it looks like it starts, in Israel, and then immediately leaves. Some of it has to do with climate change, because the climate starts to change. And in fact, I think climate change has a large effect on religion's both movement and its expressed behaviors. In other words, if you take a shamanist and you stick them in one place, you're going to have one kind of shamanism. In other words, like Native Americans, they all started with the same kind of symbolic behavior, but as they spread out to the Midwest, they were different than when they went to the coast of California, because you have the different kind of needs change. So the same thing when climate change, it affects the people. So in Africa, which I think relates to the stuff in Israel, and the DNA shows that everyone actually gets limited from all over Africa to actually southern Africa, which is where this stuff happens. Early animism, 100,000 to 74,000 years ago, in Border Cave, which is basically at the time a savanna woodland vegetation, and it implies that there was a lot of density, so it was probably a different climate than we kind of see now. So it was a burial of a 4 to 6 month old child. It was found in a pit with a personal adornment. It was a perforated shell. And some of the oldest beads made by humans from ostrich shells are also found in Border Cave at 42,000 years ago. So some people call this art. I do not call this art. To me, this is the template for two things. One, art, later, and also writing. This is a kind of like, I see it as a magical, early kind of writing art, which to me, the early stuff was the same. It was all sort of like religious, and it was a way to express stuff. So what they found out, why it's broken down into different categories, is there actually was, in a sense, different advancements in how they did these carvings. So it evolves just like everything else evolves. So 77,000 years ago, in South Africa, are 49 intentionally perforated shell beads in clusters of 2 to 17. Similar wear patterns suggest they were strung together, and some beads holding red ochre inside them. Moreover, similar shell beads have also been found in caves in North Africa and in the Middle East, dating to 100,000 to 70,000 years ago. And this right here is a Neanderthal mask. Found in France at 75,600 years ago, and it has a piece of animal bone wedged in the hole to make a little face. Probably still like an ancestor totem of some kind, but it's getting more and more symbolic. So, was it just us? The origin of the modern mind 75,000 years ago? It doesn't look so. Thus, we need to rethink our ideas about the evolving mind of the Neanderthal skull. And is elongated in the back of a football. Modern human skull is more basket-like shape, and have been recorded in a basketball-like shape. Amazing, Neanderthal DNA and Europeans identified 2 Neanderthal gene variants linked to head shape. Also influence of birth organization and evolution acting on the brain might have reshaped the skull. So 75,000 years ago, Neanderthals make tools they do not use. These happen to be clear crystal stone that's not even good as a tool. It doesn't make a very sharp edge, nor does it keep a good edge. So then they weren't used. I think they were just symbolic. That their use was probably, think about this. Here's a stone I can see through. That to me, what if you didn't know any better, would be a magical stone. All our stones you can't see through. So I can see where, interesting though, they still made them into shapes, they just didn't use them. I think they're starting to use sacred stones. So this right here explains the dispersals from Africa and how all humans, in a sense, trace to one place. This right here, the other thing here, is showing more in detail all the different actual places they find artifacts for modern humans. So 75,000 to 70,000 years ago is a stone snake in Rhino Cave from South Africa. First evidence of worship. And it proves for us varied sets of behavior patterns, which fits best with a ritualized type of behavior. And they were colorful, non-local stone tools that have been carefully and elaborately made than just to be, in a sense, offered to the snake. What they would do is basically burn them under the snake and ruin their tools they just made. Because that makes all kinds of sense. But I can see that it has to do with sacrifice. And that's a theme that all religions like to have too. You have to give up something of value. So they spend all this time and make this valuable stone tool just to ruin it for the snake. The thing I think the snake does is two things. And there's another whole thing what they made these marks. I think they're scales, but I think also it could relate to the stars. Because they have a lot of shapes like this that relate to stars and ancestors. The snake, two things. Number one, the umbilical cord from a female, and thus life. And the fact that a snake sheds its skin, in the sense of death. And so, or rebirth, actually, death and rebirth. So the thought that our spirits go up and they're still alive, even though we died. So it has a dual meaning to me. 4,000 years ago, Border Cave, South Africa, burial, like I already showed you, and there's some other items. Oops. This right here is 73,000 years old example, and they believe it has to do with possible like a larger piece of art or symbolic, expression that got broken. This is only chip left, but the pieces are obviously colors going to the edges. It must have been bigger. This is what I call the first art. This is the Neanderthals. Once again, dang, they beat us again. And I think, did Neanderthals help inspire Totemism? Because the art dating to 65,000 years ago, at least in Spain, seems to then later be copied by Totemists, including all the way down to Indonesia. So, and if you notice too, they have those dots again. I think that the dots relate to stars. I think the hands also relate to ancestors and stars because this is a star, in a sense, your hand. And you'll see sometimes they put multiple hands, like a whole wall of hands all real close together. Some people used to think it just had to do with like signing your work. No. They have ones where they have a whole wall. That's all it is just hands. Tons of them real close together. And so I think like a star like shines, I think that, and then it's also saying I am a ancestor or a person. And like I said, I think those dots relate to that. I don't know exactly what all this stuff means. Some of those look like animals. This could be an animal chasing other animals, running. But